I saw in my own son's eyes the same vacant look my great-grandfather had before he tried to hang his own sister. It was in that moment that I knew my family's nightmare had returned. Good afternoon, my dears. It's Grandma Helen here, 72 years old and speaking directly from my little house in Laredo, Texas, right on the border with Mexico. This desert air is a blessing when it's warm, you know? Today, I'm here to share with you a story I've kept deep in my heart for over 30 years. A story of love, of sorrow, and of how destiny sometimes weaves traps we never see coming. But before we begin this difficult journey, I'd like to ask for a small favor from the heart. Give this video a like. It doesn't cost a thing. And tell me in the comments what part of the country you're watching me from. I'd love to know your name. I also love reading every single one of your comments. It makes me feel less alone in this big house that holds only me and my memories now. I was born in 1953 in a simple but well-kept house in the Cerro neighborhood, right here in Laredo. My parents, Robert and Maria Lopez, were hardworking people. Dad was a carpenter who made furniture that was truly a work of art, with curves and carvings you rarely see anymore. Mom was a seamstress for hire, mainly making party dresses. The house was always filled with colorful fabrics, laces, and ribbons she used in her work. I had a happy childhood, you know. I'd play in the street with the other kids and walk to school holding hands with my older sister Josephine. Our house didn't have luxuries, but we never went without food on the table, or love. Oh, and how there was so much love in that house. My father, even when he was tired from work, always found time to tell stories before bed. My mother would hum all day long while she sewed, making the house feel brighter, more alive. The only shadow on our family came from the stories about my paternal great-grandfather Antonio. He died long before I was born, but the stories about him were whispered by the adults when they thought we children weren't listening. They said he had mental problems, that he would sometimes go for days without sleeping, talking nonsense, and seeing people who weren't there, that he once tried to hang his own sister because he thought she had been replaced by a snake disguised as a person. "It's a thing that runs in the blood," my grandmother would quietly tell my mother. "Thank God it skipped a generation. Neither your father nor you had it." I grew up hearing those stories like scary tales, with a shiver down my spine, but knowing it was a thing of the past that wouldn't affect me. How wrong I was, my God. But let's take it slow because this is a long story, and I want to tell you every little detail. I finished school when I was 18, in the early 70s. It was a beautiful time, you know. You dreamed, you had hope for the future, even with all the country's difficulties. I got a job as a secretary at an accounting firm downtown. I didn't make much, but I helped out at home and still had a little money left over to buy some lipstick and new sandals once in a while. It was at that firm that I met Felipe. Oh my God, Felipe. Just saying his name, even after all these years, my heart still flutters differently. He was an accountant, a recent graduate who had moved from Dallas to work in the city. He had broad shoulders, dark hair, and the most striking thing, those honey-colored, almost golden eyes when the sun hit them just right. A handsome man, you see, not just because he was my husband, no, but he was a sight to behold. I remember our first meeting like it was yesterday. He came into the office carrying a stack of files he could barely balance. I was organizing some documents, and when I looked up, I saw this clumsy young man trying not to drop everything on the floor. I rushed to help him. Our hands touched for an instant, and that was it. It was like a jolt of lightning, you know? That electric current that runs through your whole body when you meet someone special. "Thank you so much," he said, with that smile that I would later discover was uniquely his. "I'm Felipe, the new accountant." "Helen," I replied, feeling my face heat up. "Welcome to the firm." It took him a whole 3 weeks to ask me out. 3 weeks of exchanged smiles in the hallways, of made-up excuses to come to my desk and ask about some client, of shared coffees in the little break room. When he finally mustered up the courage, it was to invite me to the movies to see Love Story, a romance. I said yes right away, of course. We dated for 2 years with all the respect that was customary back then. He would pick me up at home, talk to my parents in the living room, take me for walks in the park for ice cream, to the movies when there was a good film, and to city festivals where we would dance together, but always with that respectable distance that adults would observe. You know how it is? It was a beautiful courtship, without rush. Felipe was different from the other boys I knew. Gentle, attentive, respectful. He never raised his voice, even when we disagreed about something. He had this calm way of resolving things, talking it out, explaining his point of view, and he treated me like a queen. He'd bring me flowers for no special occasion and remembered little details I mentioned. He made a point of introducing me to everyone as the most beautiful and intelligent woman in Laredo. In 1975, he asked me to marry him. It was a Sunday after lunch at my parents' house. He asked to speak with my father alone, and they were locked in the small room that served as a carpentry workshop for almost an hour. When they came out, my father had tears in his eyes but a smile on his face. Felipe came to me, knelt right there in front of the whole family, and pulled a small box with a simple but beautiful ring out of his pocket. "Helen," he said, his voice trembling a little, "will you marry me and make me the happiest man in this world?" "I don't even need to tell you," I said, "yes, right?" The whole family applauded instantly. My mother cried, and my cousins immediately started arguing about the dress, the cake, and the flowers. We got married 6 months later in a simple ceremony at the First United Methodist Church of Laredo. We didn't have much money, but our families came together to make a beautiful party. My mother and my aunt spent weeks preparing sweets and appetizers. My father made a point of building the table for the cake with his own hands, using the most beautiful wood he could find. Friends took turns helping with the decorations for the church and the fellowship hall. My dress wasn't the most luxurious, but it was made with so much love by my mother and my godmother that for me, it was the most beautiful in the world. Delicate lace, tiny pearls sewn one by one onto the bodice, a modest but elegant train. When I looked in the mirror that day, I barely recognized the girl staring back at me. She looked like a princess from the stories my father used to tell when I was little. Felipe was waiting at the altar, so handsome in his navy blue suit, the only one he owned, but impeccably pressed and tailored for the occasion. When our eyes met, I saw tears in his. He later confessed, "When I saw you walking down the aisle, Helen, I thought my heart was going to burst with so much happiness." We started our life together in a small but cozy apartment near downtown. 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a tight little bathroom. It wasn't much, but to us, it felt like a palace. We decorated it with simple furniture, some made by my father, others bought on an installment plan. I planted geraniums in the windows, sewed colorful curtains, and decorated every corner with the greatest care. Felipe continued to work at the accounting firm, and after the wedding, I started making cakes and sweets to order from home. I'd always loved to bake, and soon my cupcakes, cheesecakes, and party cakes became famous in the neighborhood. It wasn't a steady income like the firm, but it helped with the bills and allowed me to stay home, preparing our nest, because that was our dream, to have a child. From the first days of our marriage, we would talk about it, what they would be like, what we would name them, and how we would raise them. Felipe wanted a boy to play ball with and to teach how to fish on weekends. I dreamed of a girl to dress in ribbons and bows and to teach the family recipes. But deep down, what we really wanted was a healthy baby. It didn't matter if it was a boy or a girl. The first few months of our marriage were pure joy. Discovering each other, learning to live together, making plans, waking up next to him every day, making coffee together before he left for work, and greeting him with a kiss when he came back in the evening. It was a simple happiness, but so complete that sometimes I would find myself feeling scared that it was all too good to last. At night, lying in bed, we would talk about the future. Felipe dreamed of opening his own accounting firm one day. I thought about turning my baking business into something bigger, maybe a small pastry shop. And of course, we planned our family. "I want at least 3 kids," Felipe would say, holding me close. "A house full of children running around, laughing." "3?" I would reply, pretending to be shocked. "Let's start with 1 and then we'll talk." And we would laugh and kiss and try month after month to make that dream come true. After 1 year of trying with no success, we started to worry. Was something wrong? We went to doctors, had tests done, and everything was normal, they said. It's just a matter of time and patience, they would assure us. You're young and healthy. It will happen. And it did. In June of 1977, I finally found out I was pregnant. Oh my God, what a day that was. I took the test at the clinic that morning and spent the entire day planning how I would tell Felipe the news. I made his favorite dinner, a pot roast with mashed potatoes. As the good Texan he was, I set the table with our lace tablecloth we saved for special occasions. I even put flowers in a vase. When he came home from work, he was surprised by all the effort. "Is it our anniversary and I forgot?" he asked, worried. "No, my love," I replied, barely able to hold back a smile. "But we do have something to celebrate." During dinner, we talked about his day, about trivial things. I was practically bursting with the desire to tell him, but I held on for the right moment. When we got to dessert, a chocolate pudding he adored, I placed a small package on the table. "What is this?" he asked, surprised. "Open it and see," I replied, my heart pounding. Inside the box was a tiny pair of crocheted booties that my neighbor had helped me make that very afternoon. Felipe looked at the booties, then at me, then back at the booties. For a moment, he seemed not to understand. Then his eyes widened and filled with tears. "Helen, you're—" I nodded, also crying now. "We're going to have a baby, Felipe. I'm 2 months pregnant." He got up from his chair so fast he almost knocked it over. He came around the table and hugged me tight, lifting me off the floor and spinning me around the small living room. We were laughing and crying at the same time, holding each other, barely believing that our dream was finally coming true. That night, lying in bed, Felipe placed his hand on my still flat belly and just stayed there, in silence, as if he could already feel the baby growing inside. "I'm going to be the best father in the world," he promised, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm going to teach him everything I know. I'll always be there. I'll love this child with all my strength." "I know you will," I replied, running my hand through his hair. "You're already the best husband in the world. You're going to be a wonderful father." The pregnancy was calm, thank God. I had morning sickness for the first few months, but nothing that kept me from doing my chores and baking orders. Felipe became even more attentive, if that was even possible. He'd come home from work with some fruit I was craving. He'd massage my feet when they swelled at the end of the day. He'd read books about babies and child development with so much dedication that sometimes I'd joke he was more pregnant than I was. In the 5th month, we found out we were having a boy. Felipe was so happy, he went out and told the whole town. "We're going to name him Michael Robert," he announced to anyone who would listen. "He's going to be an accountant like his father, or a doctor, or an engineer, whatever he wants to be." We prepared the baby's room with so much love. The walls, which were once white, were painted a light blue with white clouds that my cousin, who was good at drawing, painted for an entire Sunday. The crib was a gift from my parents. My father made a point of building it with his own hands, using the most beautiful wood he could find. My mother and aunts took turns making the layette. Sheets, diapers, blankets, tiny clothes that I would keep in the dresser, running my hand over each piece and imagining the little face that would soon fill those clothes. The last few months were filled with pure anticipation, my belly big, the baby's movements getting stronger, as if he couldn't wait to meet the world. Felipe would talk to my belly every night, telling him about his day, singing him lullabies, and making promises. "I'll take you fishing as soon as you get a little bigger," he would say. "I'm going to teach you how to play football, how to ride a bike, how to be a good man." Mike was born on a cold January morning in 1978, after almost 12 hours of labor. A chubby, rosy baby with a head of black hair that surprised even the doctors. "It looks like he was born with his hair combed," the nurse joked when they put him in my arms for the first time. I felt a love I didn't know was possible. It was as if my heart had doubled in size to accommodate all that feeling. Felipe, beside me, cried without any shame, his eyes fixed on the tiny bundle that was our son. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently running his finger over the baby's cheek. "Thank you, my love. Thank you for giving me this gift." We came home 3 days later, and our life entered a new phase. Sleepless nights, diapers to change, bottles to prepare, cries to decipher. But every challenge came with so much joy that we didn't even feel the tiredness. Mike's first smile, his first little tooth, the first time he rolled over on his own in bed, every milestone was celebrated as if it were the greatest achievement in the world. Felipe proved to be the father he promised he'd be. Even tired from work, he would come home and go straight to the crib. He would pick up our son, play with him, help with his bath, and tell him stories. On weekends, he would put Mike in the stroller and go for a walk around town, proud, showing his son to every acquaintance he met along the way. "Look how smart he is," he would say. "He already knows our voices. He can grab the rattle on his own, my dears." Looking back at those first few years, everything seemed so perfect. We had a beautiful family, a happy marriage, a healthy son who was growing up strong and smart. How could I have imagined that destiny had such a cruel turn in store for us? How could I have known that the same blood that ran in the veins of my great-grandfather Antonio, that man of whispered stories, also ran in my boy's veins? But I'm getting ahead of myself, getting lost in the story. These memories sometimes confuse me, you know. One moment I'm here, smelling homemade bread baking, hearing my little boy's laughter echoing through the house. The next moment, I'm already ahead, watching everything crumble like a sandcastle. My loves, if you've made it this far into the story, please type, "I'm listening," in the comments, so I know there are people on the other side keeping me company on this difficult journey. In the next part, I'll tell you about our family's golden years before the shadows started to appear. Stay with me. Yes, Mike's childhood was a dream, my dears. Those first few years brought so much happiness that even now, so many decades later, when I close my eyes, I can still smell that baby scent, hear those delicious giggles echoing through the house, and see those curious little eyes discovering the world. From a very young age, my son showed an extraordinary intelligence. At just 1 year old, he was already speaking a few clear words, mama, dada, water, while other children his age were still just babbling. At 2, he was forming complete sentences that left his daycare teachers impressed. "Grandma Helen, this child is a prodigy," they would say when I went to pick him up. "He talks like a little adult." Felipe was so proud his chest nearly burst his shirt buttons. He bought a Super 8 film camera on 12 installment payments, an incredible luxury for our situation back then, just to record every moment of our son's development. On weekends, he would turn the living room into a movie theater, projecting home movies of Mike on the white wall, taking his first steps, blowing out birthday candles, and playing at the park. "This boy is going to go far," he would say, his eyes shining with expectation. "He has his mother's intelligence and his father's determination. He's going to be a doctor, or maybe even a politician." When Mike turned 3 in 1981, we knew we needed a bigger house. Our little apartment, which once seemed like a palace, was now too small for our son's energy. He needed space to run, to explore, to grow. Luckily, Felipe's business was going well. He had been promoted to manager at the accounting firm, and my baking orders had built a loyal clientele that allowed me to contribute significantly to the family budget. We saved for months and were able to make a down payment on a simple but spacious house in the Vista Hills neighborhood. It had a backyard with a leafy lemon tree, 3 bedrooms, one for us, one for Mike, and one we dreamed of turning into a room for the second child we planned to have. In the front, there was a small porch where I put pots of geraniums and ferns, making the space my little corner of peace. The move to the new house coincided with Mike starting preschool. We carefully chose Little People Preschool, which had an excellent reputation and was only 4 blocks from home. On his first day, I got him ready with so much care. His uniform was impeccably pressed. His lunchbox was filled with sandwiches, fruit, and a surprise cupcake, and his hair was combed with gel smelling of kids' cologne. "You're going to love school, my love," I explained as we walked hand in hand. "You'll make lots of friends, learn new things, and play a lot." He looked at me with those big, serious eyes, the same honey-colored eyes as his father, and replied with a maturity that surprised me. "I know, Mom. I'm going to be the best student in the class." And he was. Mike adapted to school like a fish to water. In just a few weeks, the teachers were already talking about his quick learning, his creativity in drawings, and his natural leadership among the other kids. At home, he asked us to read to him every night, not children's stories, but grown-up books, as he called them. At not quite 4 years old, he already recognized all the letters and could put a few together into simple words. Felipe, beaming with pride, would bring home increasingly advanced children's books, puzzles with more pieces, and educational games that stimulated his mind. He would spend hours on the living room floor building cities out of blocks with his son, inventing fantastical stories about brave princes and mysterious dragons, and patiently answering the boys' curious questions about how things worked, from clocks to stars, from airplanes to ants. "Why is the sky blue, Dad?" "How do fish breathe underwater?" "Where does the sun go at night?" The questions never stopped, and Felipe made a point of looking for real, scientific answers, never underestimating his son's intelligence. Our routine found a comfortable rhythm in those years. Felipe would leave for work early. I would take Mike to school, then come home to prepare the day's baking orders. In the afternoon, I'd pick up our boy, and we'd spend a few hours together doing homework, playing in the backyard, and preparing dinner for Felipe to find when he came home from the office. During school vacations, we would take little trips, usually to visit Mike's paternal grandparents in Dallas or to spend a few days at Galveston Beach. They weren't luxurious vacations. We stayed at simple guest houses and brought food from home to save money. But they were precious moments, filled with simple joys like sandcastles, ice cream on the beach, and boat rides. I remember one of those trips in January of 1983 when Mike was 5 years old. We were at Galveston Beach on a sunny afternoon. Felipe had gone to buy us popsicles, and I was watching Mike play in the wet sand, focused on building an elaborate system of canals for the ocean water to flow in and out of. Suddenly, an older boy, he must have been around 8, came running and deliberately stomped right through the middle of the construction, destroying everything. I got up immediately, ready to intervene, to comfort my son, who I was sure was about to start crying. But to my surprise, Mike didn't cry. He looked at the boy with a strangely calm expression and said in a voice that didn't sound like a child's, "You're going to regret that." The older boy laughed mockingly. "And what are you going to do, little boy? Cry to your mommy?" Mike continued to stare at him, motionless, with that fixed gaze that for an instant, just a flicker, reminded me of the stories about my great-grandfather. Then, without warning, he grabbed a handful of wet sand and threw it directly into the boy's eyes, who fell backward, screaming in pain. "Mike!" I cried, running toward them. "What did you do?" He turned to me, and his face was already that of my sweet boy again, with eyes wide with fear, as if he didn't even understand what he had just done. "He ruined my castle, Mom," he replied, his voice trembling. I got angry. The incident was quickly resolved. I apologized to the other boy's mother and explained that Mike had never done anything like that before and that it had just been an impulsive reaction. On the way back to the guest house, I had a serious talk with my son about how we need to control our impulses and how hurting others is never the solution, even when we're very angry. "Mike, we can't hurt people," I said. "Do you understand?" He nodded, seeming genuinely remorseful. "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know what happened. It was like another person threw the sand." At the time, I took that as just a child's way of avoiding responsibility. It was only years later that I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was more truth to that statement than I could have imagined. But that was just an isolated incident. In general, Mike was a sweet, affectionate, and obedient child. All the neighbors, teachers, and family friends would comment on how polite, helpful, and intelligent he was. "A golden child," they would say. And he was. at least in those golden years of childhood. When Mike turned 7 in 1985, something happened that would profoundly mark our family. Felipe, who had been working twice as hard at the firm, finally managed to raise enough capital to open his own business. With the help of a partner, Frank, a friend from college, he founded Frontier Accounting, a modest firm but one with great ambitions. It was a period of a lot of hard work, sleepless nights, and sacrificed weekends. Felipe would come home exhausted, but with a sparkle in his eyes that spoke of dreams coming true. I did everything I could to support him. I prepared nutritious meals for him to take to work and made sure the house was always in order, protecting the few hours he had at home so he could rest or spend quality time with our son. Mike, even though he was young, seemed to understand the importance of that moment. He didn't complain when his father missed a school presentation or came home too late for a goodnight kiss. Instead, he showed interest in the new business. He would ask to visit the office on weekends and watch, fascinated, as Felipe explained balances, taxes, and accounting. "When I grow up, I'm going to work with you, Dad," he announced once, sitting in the swivel chair that was much too big for his little body. "We'll be partners." Felipe smiled, touched, and ruffled his son's hair. "Of course, champ. The company will be called Felipe and Son. How does that sound?" Felipe's hard work paid off. In just 2 years, Frontier Accounting already had a respectable client list, including some of the most important merchants in Laredo and even some from the Mexican side of the border in Nuevo Laredo, Mexico. With the business prospering, we were finally able to make other dreams come true. We traded our old sedan for a brand new Ford. What a luxury that car was, my God. We renovated the kitchen in our house and enrolled Mike in a private school, the best one in the city. In 1988, when our son turned 10, we decided to throw a special birthday party. In previous years, we had celebrated simply, a small cake at home, a few friends invited, modest gifts. But now that our financial situation was more stable, we wanted to celebrate in a big way. We rented the community club hall, hired a superhero-themed decorator — Mike was a huge fan of Spider-Man — and I ordered a 3-tiered cake decorated with all the comic book characters he collected. Felipe bought him a new bicycle, our boy's dream gift, and I sewed a personalized superhero vest with the initials MR embroidered on the chest. It was an unforgettable party. Over 30 kids attended. There were games organized by professional entertainers, and we gave out elaborate party favors that I put together myself. Mike was radiant, running from one place to another, greeting friends, and proudly showing off the vest I had made for him. When it was time to sing Happy Birthday, with our son in the center, surrounded by friends and family, and exchanging glances of pure happiness with Felipe, I thought life couldn't get any better. We had built something precious, something solid, a happy marriage, a wonderful son, and a comfortable financial situation. The future seemed so promising, so full of possibilities. I couldn't have imagined that in just a few years, everything we built with so much love would begin to crumble. That the small, subtle signs we sometimes noticed in Mike's behavior, but chose to ignore, were just the prelude to a devastating storm that was approaching. The following years passed in a pleasant routine. Mike distinguished himself more and more in school, always among the top students, participating in math competitions, science fairs, and essay contests. At 12, he was already reading complex books, keeping a journal where he wrote surprisingly mature thoughts, and demonstrating multiple talents, from playing the guitar, a birthday gift when he turned 13, to drawing with almost photographic precision. But we also noticed some peculiarities. He was an intense kid. When he became interested in something, he would dive in almost obsessively. He went through phases of fixation on dinosaurs, then astronomy, then quantum physics, topics he would study with an unusual depth for his age. And he also had a solitary side. Despite being popular at school, he seemed to prefer his own company, spending hours in his room reading, writing, and drawing. "Is this normal?" I asked Felipe one night after noticing that Mike had spent the entire Saturday locked in his room working on a secret project he refused to show us. "Other kids his age always want to go out and play in the street." "Our son is special, Helen," Felipe replied reassuringly. He has a brilliant mind. It's natural that he's not interested in the same things as other kids. Einstein was like that as a child, you know? I accepted that explanation because I wanted to believe it, because it was easier to see our son as a misunderstood genius than to admit that something might be wrong. And in fact, most of the time, Mike was just an exceptionally intelligent and slightly introspective teenager. He had friends, participated in school activities, and talked to us about his interests and his plans for the future. In 1993, when he turned 15, Felipe decided it was time to get him more actively involved in the family business. Not as an official employee, of course, he was still too young, but as an apprentice during school vacations and on some Saturdays. Mike would go with his father to the office, learning the basics of accounting and observing how a business was run. To our surprise and delight, he showed a natural aptitude for numbers, organization, and the logic of balances and statements. In just a few weeks, he could already perform simple tasks without supervision, filing documents, entering data into spreadsheets, and answering phone calls. Felipe was bursting with pride. "He has a knack for business, Helen," he would say, excited. "When he finishes college, he's going to revolutionize the firm. I'm certain that under his leadership, frontier accounting will expand throughout the state." Those were good times. Mike seemed to have found a purpose, something that channeled his intense mental energy in a productive way. At home, we talked about the future. He would study accounting, maybe at the University of Texas in Austin, or even down in Houston. Then he would come back to gradually take over his father's business. Everything seemed to be on track, planned and promising, until 1995. It was shortly after Mike's 17th birthday when I noticed the first significant changes in his behavior. It started with small things. He, who had always been so organized, started leaving his room a mess, clothes scattered, books piled up in disarray, notebooks open on his bed. His sleep, which had always been so regular, became erratic. Sometimes I would find him awake at 3 a.m, writing frantically in notebooks he would hide when I walked into the room. "I'm just studying, Mom," he would explain with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have an important test tomorrow." But it was a school vacation, and there were no tests. His appetite also changed. He had always enjoyed eating, especially the meals I prepared with so much care. Now he would barely touch his food. He was visibly losing weight, his clothes starting to hang loosely on his adolescent body. "Are you eating enough, son?" I asked one night, worried as I watched him just push his rice around on his plate. "Are you sick?" "I'm not hungry," he replied dryly. "And stop treating me like a kid, Mom. I can take care of myself." The abruptness was also new. Mike had always been polite and respectful. Now he would answer with impatience, get irritated easily, and isolate himself more and more. Felipe tried to talk to him man to man, thinking it was just normal teenage rebellion. "Son, your mom is worried. I am too. If there's something bothering you, you can tell us. We're here to help." "There's nothing wrong with me," Mike exploded, slamming his bedroom door. "I just want you to leave me alone." We started getting phone calls from the school. Mike, the star student, was skipping classes. When he did attend, he seemed lethargic, unable to concentrate. Other times he was too agitated, interrupting teachers with questions or comments out of context. His grades, which were always excellent, plummeted. "We're worried," the school counselor said during a tense meeting. "Michael has always been one of our best students. This drastic change in behavior could indicate serious problems. Maybe drugs, maybe depression. Have you noticed anything at home?" Of course we had noticed, but hearing it from a professional's mouth, in the formality of that room with framed diplomas on the walls, made it all terribly real. This wasn't just a phase. Something was truly wrong with our son. We decided to take him to a doctor. It wasn't easy to convince him. He screamed and resisted, accusing us of thinking he was crazy. But Felipe was firm, using that authoritative tone he rarely needed to use for the first time. "It's not a choice, Mike. You're going to the doctor, and that's final." The family doctor ran a battery of tests, blood, urine, even a scan to rule out neurological problems. Everything was normal. "Physically, your son is fine," he assured us. but I strongly recommend a psychological or psychiatric evaluation." The word psychiatric hit our family like a bomb. Felipe initially resisted. "My son is not crazy, doctor." But I insisted. I had started to make connections I didn't want to make. The stories about my great-grandfather Antonio, Mike's age, 17, which was exactly when they said my great-grandfather's mental problems had started to manifest. "It's just one appointment, Felipe," I argued, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "If it's nothing, that's great. But if it's something that needs treatment, the sooner we find out, the better." Reluctantly, he agreed. I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Johnson, the only psychiatrist in town. He was an elderly man with a reputation for being competent, despite his somewhat old-fashioned ways. Mike refused to go on the morning of the appointment. He locked himself in the bathroom and wouldn't come out, not with pleas or threats. "You want to lock me up?" he screamed through the door. "You want to get rid of me like you did with the crazy old man of the family?" That sent a chill down my spine. We had never told Mike about my great-grandfather. How could he have known? When we finally managed to convince him to come out of the bathroom, Felipe threatened to knock down the door. He was different, too calm, almost serene, with a strange smile on his lips. "Okay," he said docilely. "Let's go to the doctor. You're right. I'm not well." The sudden change in attitude should have alarmed me, but I was so relieved that I didn't question it. On the way to the office, sitting in the back seat of the car, Mike was quietly humming a song I didn't recognize. Looking in the rearview mirror, I noticed his eyes were glassy, fixed on some invisible point, and his lips were moving as if he was talking to someone. It was at that moment, watching my son in the rearview mirror on the way to the psychiatrist, that I saw for the first time what I had been so afraid of. In my own son's eyes, the same vacant look they said my great-grandfather had before he tried to hang his own sister, and I knew with a devastating certainty that my family's nightmare had returned. The appointment with Dr. Johnson was both revealing and terrifying. Initially, Mike was cooperative, answering questions with apparent clarity. But when the doctor started to explore his recent behavioral changes, something shifted. My son started speaking faster, jumping from one topic to another, using complicated words and sentences that barely made sense. "The numbers talk to me, doctor," he said, his eyes shining with a feverish intensity. "They have colors and textures. 7 is red and rough like sandpaper. 3 is blue and slick like soap. The universe is encoded in mathematical patterns that only I can see." Then he suddenly fell silent, staring intently at an empty corner of the room. When the doctor asked what he was thinking, Mike replied in a low voice, "He's here. The man in the hat is telling me you can't be trusted." It felt as if the floor had opened up beneath my feet. Felipe squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, but I barely felt it. My focus was entirely on our son, who now seemed to be having an animated conversation with the empty space. Dr. Johnson's diagnosis was cautious, but direct. "Your son is showing symptoms suggestive of a schizophrenia spectrum disorder, auditory and visual hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking. The age is typical for the onset of symptoms, especially in men." "But he was always so normal," Felipe protested, his voice breaking. "So smart, so well-adjusted." "Schizophrenia often affects brilliant people," the doctor explained, "and the first psychotic episodes are often preceded by a period of normal functioning. It's a treacherous disease. That's exactly why when we notice the signs, the process is often already advanced." We left that appointment with a prescription for medication and the recommendation to seek more specialized treatment in Dallas, where there were psychiatrists with more experience in cases like Mike's. The drive home was silent, heavy. In the back seat, our son had returned to his silence, staring out the window with an absent expression. That night, after putting Mike to bed, he took the first pill without resistance, which surprised me. Felipe and I sat on the porch, our hands clasped, trying to process the new reality that was unfolding. "It's all going to be okay," Felipe repeated, more to himself than to me. We'll get him the best treatment, the best doctors. Our son will overcome this. I wanted to believe him. Lord knows I did. But something inside me knew our life would never be the same again. That the golden years were behind us, and now we were facing a dark, uncertain, and terrifying journey. What we didn't know yet was how awful this journey would be. We couldn't have imagined that in just a few months we would lose not only our son's sanity, but also the pillar that held our family together. That destiny had an even greater trial in store for us when the violence that ran in my great-grandfather's blood would finally find its most brutal expression in the hands of my own son. But that, my dears, is a story for the next chapter of this painful saga that has been my life. A story I need to tell, no matter how difficult it is, so that maybe it can help other families who are facing the invisible monster of mental illness. Please give this video a like. I'd appreciate it so much. In the weeks following the diagnosis, we lived in a strange limbo. The medication that Dr. Johnson prescribed seemed to calm Mike's most obvious symptoms, the hallucinations, the agitation, the disjointed speech. He started sleeping better, eating regularly, and even went back to school after 2 weeks of rest at home. We came to believe, for a brief and blessed moment, that maybe the doctor had exaggerated, that maybe it wasn't schizophrenia, just an isolated episode of stress, of mental exhaustion from a brilliant teenager under too much pressure. How wrong we were. In March of 1995, following Dr. Johnson's recommendation, we traveled to Dallas for a consultation with a specialist, Dr. Anthony Roberts, a renowned psychiatrist with extensive experience in psychotic disorders. His clinic was in a modern building in the neighborhood of University Park, so different from our doctor's old-fashioned office in Laredo. He had polite receptionists, a waiting room with comfortable armchairs, current magazines, and a decorative water fountain that created a calming atmosphere. Mike, surprisingly, was cooperative that day. He dressed appropriately, held a clear conversation during the 3-hour trip, and even joked with his father about the chaotic traffic in the big city. When we arrived, he sat calmly in the waiting room, flipping through a scientific magazine with apparent interest. "I'm feeling so much better," he assured us before going into the office. "I think these meds really work." Felipe squeezed my hand, a flicker of hope in his tired eyes. "See? Our boy is coming back." The consultation lasted almost 2 hours. Dr. Roberts first spoke with Mike alone, then with us, and finally with all 3 of us together. His approach was different, less formal and warmer than Dr. Johnson's, but just as meticulous. He took a detailed history, explored family background. I shuddered at the mention of my great-grandfather Antonio, reviewed the medications, and ordered new tests. When it was finally time for the diagnosis, his face took on a gentle but serious expression. "Michael presents a picture that is quite consistent with paranoid schizophrenia," he explained, using technical terms that blurred in my anxious mind. "The delusions of reference, the auditory hallucinations, the blunted affect interspersed with periods of clarity. It all points to a schizophrenic spectrum disorder, likely with a significant hereditary component." "But he seems so well today," Felipe argued, his voice trembling with contained emotion. "Almost normal." The doctor nodded understandingly. "That's a common characteristic of the disease, especially in the initial stages. There are fluctuations, periods of apparent normality followed by relapses. The medications help control the symptoms, but they don't cure the condition." "Will he be able to live a normal life?" I asked. It was the question that had tormented me most since the nightmare began. Will he be able to study, work, have a family of his own one day? "With the right treatment, many patients achieve a satisfactory quality of life," the doctor replied, choosing his words carefully. "But I have to be honest, Michael will have significant challenges. Schizophrenia is a chronic condition that will require continuous medical monitoring, regular medication, and possibly lifestyle adaptations." We left that appointment with a new prescription for more modern medications and adjusted doses, and referrals for complementary therapies, psychotherapy, occupational therapy, and family support groups. Dr. Roberts suggested that we consider having Mike's treatment in Dallas, where there would be more specialized resources. Think about it carefully, he advised. It's an important decision. Moving to a new city can be stressful, but the benefits of access to a specialized multidisciplinary team may outweigh the inconvenience. On the way back to Laredo, we discussed our options. Moving to Dallas would mean leaving our house, Felipe's business, my small network of baking clients, and our entire social circle. But staying would mean relying only on Dr. Johnson, who was already elderly and had outdated knowledge about the latest treatments. Mike, sitting in the back seat, remained strangely silent. When I asked what he thought of the idea of moving to the big city, he just shrugged. "It doesn't matter," he replied, looking out the window. "The man in the hat is coming with me anyway." A shiver ran down my spine. The man in the hat, his most frequent hallucination, hadn't been mentioned in days. I thought it had disappeared with the medication. I exchanged a worried glance with Felipe, who gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. We decided to wait, to give the new medications a chance, and see how Mike would respond in the coming weeks before making a drastic decision like moving cities. Felipe talked to Frank, his partner, about the possibility of temporarily reducing his workload to be more present at home. I reorganized my baking orders, prioritizing only my oldest and most profitable clients to have more time to take care of our son. For a few weeks, it seemed like we had made the right decision. Mike went back to school full-time and resumed some of his normal activities. The new medications had side effects. He complained of a dry mouth, daytime drowsiness, and slight tremors in his hands. But they seemed to be controlling the psychotic symptoms. The weekly appointments with Dr. Johnson were calm and routine. It was in May, almost 2 months after the Dallas appointment, that things started to fall apart again. It all began when I found the pills, dozens of them, hidden inside a book on Mike's bedroom shelf. He hadn't been taking the medication for weeks, maybe since we got back from Dallas. I confronted him, of course, first calmly, trying to understand. "Son, why did you hide the meds? You know you need them to be well." He looked at me with a coldness I didn't recognize. "They make me slow and heavy. I can't think straight when I take them." "But the delusions come back without them, Mike." A strange smile formed on his lips. "And who says they're delusions, Mom? What if I really can see things that you can't? What if the man in the hat is real, just invisible to ordinary minds?" The conversation quickly degenerated. Mike became agitated, pacing back and forth in his room, gesturing at the air as if he were talking to someone only he could see. When I tried to hold him and calm him down, he pushed me with surprising force, making me fall back onto the bed. "Don't touch me!" he screamed, his eyes wide with fear and rage. "He says you want to poison me, that the meds are poison." Felipe arrived home from work in the middle of this chaos. I'd never seen him so scared as in that moment, standing in the bedroom doorway, watching our 17-year-old son in the throes of a psychotic break, yelling delusional accusations at us. We called Dr. Johnson, who came to our house immediately. For the first time, he mentioned the possibility of hospitalization. If he's not taking the medication voluntarily and is showing aggressive behavior and intense paranoid delusions, it may be necessary for him to have a period of stabilization in a hospital setting, the doctor explained, while in the next room, Mike continued to talk to himself, now in a lower, more conspiratorial voice. The idea of hospitalizing our son broke our hearts. We imagined psychiatric hospitals as dark, dehumanizing places filled with sedated patients and brutal treatments. But Dr. Johnson assured us that things had changed a lot in recent decades. St. Luke's Psychiatric Hospital in Dallas has an excellent youth wing, he explained. The treatment is humane, focused on stabilization and reintegration. We're not talking about a prolonged hospitalization, just the time needed to adjust the medication and ensure that Michael takes it regularly. Reluctantly, we agreed to consider the option. But before we could make any decision, Mike seemed to improve suddenly. The next morning, he came down for breakfast, calm and almost serene. He apologized for his behavior the night before and promised to start taking his meds regularly. He said he had had a moment of confusion, but now he was clearer. "It was just a slip-up, Mom," he explained, obediently taking the pill I placed beside his glass of juice. "It won't happen again." I wanted so badly to believe him, and for a few days I really did. I personally supervised every dose of medication, making sure he actually swallowed it, not hiding it under his tongue as I later discovered he had been doing. Mike returned to his routine: school, home, and sometimes a trip to his father's office on weekends. He seemed stable, almost normal. It was exactly when we let our guard down that the worst happened. One Friday in June, Mike didn't come home from school at the usual time. By 5 in the afternoon, I was starting to worry. By 6, I was in a panic. I called all his friends I knew, the school, even the small police station in town. No one had any news. Felipe went out to look for him, driving around the places our son used to frequent: the Central Park, the public library, the football field on the edge of town. Nothing. When he returned around 9 o'clock that night, his face was pale, his eyes red from holding back tears. "We're going to the police," he decided. "This isn't normal. Something has happened." We were getting ready to leave when we heard the sound of keys in the door. Mike walked in, his hair messy, his clothes dirty and wrinkled, and a strong smell of alcohol coming from him. "Where have you been?" Felipe practically shouted, a mix of relief and fury in his voice. "We've been worried sick." Mike smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a bitter, almost adult sound. "I went to meet some friends in Nuevo Laredo, people who actually understand me." Nuevo Laredo was the Mexican city on the other side of the border, literally a few steps away from downtown Laredo. The two cities were practically one, separated only by the Rio Grande, the famous border between the U.S. and Mexico. "What friends?" I insisted, noticing that his eyes were dilated, not just from the alcohol. "What did you take, Mike?" He laughed. "What makes me feel good, Mom? What keeps the voices away, better than those pills you force me to swallow?" Felipe stepped forward and grabbed his son's arm. "Did you use drugs? Answer me. What happened?" What happened next was so fast that I barely had time to process it. Mike pulled away with a sharp movement and then threw a punch at his father's face. Felipe stumbled backward, more surprised than hurt, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "Don't touch me," Mike yelled, his eyes wide and wild. "Neither of you touch me. You're not my parents. My real parents have been replaced." It was the classic Capgras delusion. I found out the name later in my desperate readings about the disease, the conviction that people close to you, usually family members, have been replaced by identical imposters. It's a common symptom in certain types of paranoid schizophrenia. That night was a nightmare. Mike alternated between periods of intense aggression, breaking objects and threatening us, and moments of pure fear, huddled in a corner, begging the imposters not to hurt him. We called Dr. Johnson, who came accompanied by 2 nurses from the small-town hospital. It took physical force to restrain our son and give him a sedative. "We have no choice," the doctor said, watching Mike finally fall asleep on the living room sofa, surrounded by the wreckage of objects he had broken in his rage. "He needs immediate hospitalization." The next day, a cloudy Saturday that seemed to reflect the darkness in our hearts, we made the most difficult trip of our lives. Mike, still under the effects of the sedative, barely registered what was happening. We settled him in the back seat of the car, covered him with a blanket, and began the long trip to Dallas. The admission process at St. Luke's Hospital was surprisingly efficient, but emotionally devastating. We filled out forms, signed authorizations, and spoke with doctors, social workers, and psychologists. We repeatedly explained the story: the first symptoms, the diagnosis, the refusal to take medication, the violent episode from the night before. When it was time to say goodbye, Mike was clearer, starting to understand what was happening. The panic in his eyes when he realized he was going to be left there among strangers in an unfamiliar place almost broke my resolve. "Mom, don't do this," he begged, grabbing my hand tightly. For a moment, he was my boy again, not the disturbed young man from the night before. "Don't leave me here. I promise I'll be good. I'll take the meds. I'll do everything right." Felipe, beside me, swallowed hard, tears running freely down his face, which was marked by the night of terror. "It's for your own good, son, just until you're better." "I'm already better," Mike insisted, looking frantically around at the sterile white walls of the admission room. "Please, Dad, Mom, don't abandon me here." It took all my strength to let go of his hand, to take a step back when the nurses came to take him away. The scream he let out, an animal sound, pure suffering, still echoes in my nightmares. "You'll pay for this," he bellowed as he was led down the hallway. It was no longer my son's voice, but something distorted by rage and the disease. "You're not my parents. My parents would never throw me in a mental institution." In the car, heading home without our son, the silence between Felipe and me was dense, almost suffocating. Words seemed inadequate in the face of the magnitude of the pain we felt. He drove mechanically, his eyes fixed on the road, occasionally raising a hand to wipe away a stubborn tear. "We did the right thing," he finally murmured when we were halfway home. "We had no choice." "I know," I replied, even though a part of me wasn't so sure. "But why does doing the right thing hurt so much?" The days that followed were strange, ghostly. The house, which had once been so alive with Mike's presence, even on his most difficult days, now felt like a mausoleum. His empty room, the empty chair at the dining room table, the silence in the mornings where we used to hear his hurried footsteps getting ready for school. We called the hospital every day, anxious for news. In the first few days, the information was minimal. "He's adjusting," they would say. "A period of adjustment is normal." The first week, we couldn't visit him. It was part of the protocol for patients in acute crisis, they explained. Finally, after 10 days that felt like an eternity, we were allowed to visit our son. We made that 3-hour trip to Dallas again, our hearts heavy with a mixture of hope and fear. The hospital wasn't the gloomy place I had feared. The youth wing, in particular, was surprisingly welcoming. Walls painted in light colors, a common room with games and books, and simple but clean rooms shared by a maximum of 2 patients. Mike was sharing his room with a younger boy, who seemed to have some kind of mood disorder. When he saw us in the visiting room, Mike didn't show the joy we had secretly hoped for. He was calm, almost apathetic. "It's the effect of the medication," the nurse later explained. We talked for almost an hour about trivial, superficial things. He asked about the house, about the neighbors, about Felipe's work. He avoided mentioning his condition, the treatment, or when he could come home. It was only when we were getting ready to leave that he finally looked us in the eyes, a clear, lucid gaze, the gaze of our Mike from before. "I'm sorry for what I did," he said in a low voice. "I wasn't there. I wasn't myself that night." Felipe hugged him, sobbing without shame. "We know, son. No one blames you. We just want you to be well." "I will be," he promised, returning the hug with an intensity that surprised me. "The doctors here are good. I'm taking the meds. The voices are quieter, more distant." We went home feeling more relieved, with a renewed sense of hope. Maybe, after all, the hospitalization had been the right decision. Maybe our son was on the road to recovery. The following weeks followed a pattern. We would visit Mike every Saturday, always noticing small improvements. His expression was more lively, his conversation more coherent, his interest gradually returning to the things that used to fascinate him, like books, science, and his father's business. The doctors spoke of significant progress, of a successful medication adjustment, and of positive prospects for an early discharge. In July, almost a month after his admission, we had a meeting with the full medical team: the psychiatrist, a psychologist, a social worker, and an occupational therapist. Everyone agreed that Mike was responding exceptionally well to the treatment. We discussed the next steps: hospital discharge, outpatient follow-up, and the possibility of him returning to school in the second semester. It's important to establish a structured routine, but without excessive pressure, the psychiatrist recommended. The return to normal activities must be gradual and monitored. We decided that Felipe would temporarily rent a small apartment in Dallas. I would move there with Mike so he could continue outpatient treatment while readapting to life outside the hospital. Felipe would divide his time between Laredo, where the accounting firm required his presence, and Dallas, coming on weekends and holidays. "It's not ideal, but it's temporary," Felipe assured me, though I could see the worry in his eyes. Not just about the separation, but about the finances. Renting a property in the city, maintaining 2 homes, and the frequent travel would be a considerable burden on our budget. The important thing is that our son gets the best possible treatment. At the end of July, Mike was discharged. He left the hospital a different young man, thinner, with a more serious, more adult look than his 17 years suggested, but also more stable, more present, and more aware of his condition and the need to take care of it. "I won't stop taking my meds again," he promised, as we loaded his few belongings into the car. "I learned the hard way what happens when I do." Our rented apartment was in the Country Club Estates neighborhood, not as elegant as University Park, where Dr. Roberts had his clinic, but still a pleasant area with easy access to the hospital for follow-up appointments. It was small, 2 bedrooms, a combined living room and kitchen, and 1 bathroom, but it was cozy in its own way. I furnished it with the essentials, trying to create a welcoming environment with the limited resources we had. Felipe stayed with us for the first weekend, helping us get everything organized and making sure we were comfortable and safe. When he left on Sunday night, I felt a pang in my heart that had nothing to do with the normal longing of a couple temporarily separated. It was a premonition, a vague but persistent fear that something was wrong, that our apparent victory over the disease was fragile and temporary. "It's all going to be okay," Felipe assured me, hugging me tightly before getting into the car for the long trip back. "We're on the right track now." The first few weeks in Dallas were surprisingly calm. Mike followed the treatment rigorously, therapy 3 times a week, a bi-weekly psychiatric appointment, and his medication at the exact times. He started attending a support group for young people with mental disorders, where for the first time he could talk with people who truly understood what he was going through. I enrolled him in a preparatory course for the university entrance exam, less demanding than regular school but still stimulating for his eager mind. On good days, he reminded me of the Mike from before, curious, articulate, and full of plans for the future. "I still want to go to college," he told me one night as we had dinner at the small kitchen table. "Maybe not accounting like Dad wanted. I'm thinking about psychology, to better understand what goes on in here," he said, pointing to his own head with an ironic smile on his lips. There were bad days too, of course, days when the medication seemed too heavy, leaving him lethargic and distant. Days when the side effects, tremors, dry mouth, dizziness, left him frustrated and irritable. Days when the voices, though quieter, were still there, whispering doubts and fueling fears. "The man in the hat still appears sometimes," he admitted during a joint session with his therapist, "not as clear as before, but like a shadow out of the corner of my eye, and I don't believe what he says anymore. I know he's not real, but he's still there." Felipe came every weekend, just as he promised. He would arrive on Friday night, exhausted from the trip and the intense work week, but always with a smile and with gifts. A new book for Mike, flowers for me, and typical border snacks that we knew we wouldn't find in Dallas. We spent those 2 precious days like a normal family. We'd go to the movies, walk in the park, and visit the old neighborhood. Mike seemed especially lively on those occasions, as if his father's presence completed a circuit, restoring a vital energy that was missing on weekdays. When September arrived, marking 2 months of this arrangement, we started to discuss the possibility of returning to Laredo. Dr. Roberts was cautiously optimistic. "Michael is making good progress," he acknowledged during an appointment that Felipe also attended. "But I still recommend a few more months of intensive follow-up here in the city before considering returning to his hometown. His stability is still relatively recent." Felipe sighed, the exhaustion evident on his face. The weekly trips, the double responsibility, managing the firm at the border and supporting the family in Dallas were taking their toll. "We'll follow the medical recommendation," he agreed, always prioritizing our son's well-being above any personal convenience. "But I need to find a more sustainable solution for the firm. I can't keep being away 4 days a week indefinitely." The solution came in the form of an unexpected proposal. Frank, Felipe's partner, suggested opening a branch of Frontier Accounting in Dallas. He would stay in charge of the main office in Laredo, while Felipe would develop the new operation in the big city, allowing the family to finally reunite permanently. "It's financially risky," Felipe admitted when we discussed the idea. "Opening a branch in a big city with fierce competition. But it might be our best opportunity to be together without compromising Mike's treatment." The decision was made. In the following months, while Mike continued his treatment, Felipe immersed himself in the new branch project, looking for a suitable location, handling the bureaucracy, and starting to build a client base from scratch. It was a period of intense work for him and a time of adjustment for all of us. October arrived with a sense of a new beginning. The rented apartment was replaced by a larger one, more suitable for a permanent residence. We bought new furniture and decorated the rooms with items from our home at the border, trying to create a home that mixed family comfort with the freshness of a new start. Mike seemed to flourish in this new arrangement. His father's constant presence, the stability of a set routine, and the continuity of treatment all contributed to his steady progress. He started talking about concrete plans for the next year's entrance exam, possible universities, and careers that interested him. In November, on the eve of his 18th birthday, we had one of the most meaningful conversations since the onset of his illness. We were in the living room after dinner, just the two of us. Felipe had gone to the office to handle an emergency with a client. "Mom," he began, hesitating, his eyes fixed on the television in front of us. "Do you think I'll always be like this? Always sick?" The question took me by surprise, even though I knew he had been carrying it inside him for a long time. I took a deep breath, looking for the most honest and loving answer I could give. "I think you'll always need care, son. Medication, follow-up. Schizophrenia doesn't have a cure, at least not yet, but that doesn't mean you can't have a full, happy, productive life. How can I be happy knowing that at any moment I could lose control, that the voices could come back stronger, that I could hurt the people I love like I almost did to Dad?" There was so much anguish in that question that my heart ached. I took his hands in mine, noticing how cold they were despite the warmth of the night. "You are not your disease, Mike. You are so much more than that. You're intelligent, sensitive, and talented. You are aware of your condition. You're getting treatment and learning to recognize the warning signs. That's half the battle right there." He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. "Sometimes I'm scared I'll never be able to have a normal life. A girlfriend, kids, a career. Many people with schizophrenia have all of that, son. It won't be easy. It won't be like you imagined when you were younger, but it is possible. And your father and I will be by your side every step of the way." A sad smile touched his lips. "You guys have been incredible. After everything I did, how I acted, you're still here, rebuilding your lives because of me." "Because we love you," I said. "More than anything in the world. It's always been that way since you were just a promise in my womb. It always will be." That night, lying in bed, waiting for Felipe to come back, I reflected on our journey so far, the devastating diagnosis, the painful hospitalization, the move to Dallas, and the gradual reconstruction of our lives around this new reality. It had been the most difficult year of our lives, without a doubt, but also a year of discoveries, of strengthening our bonds, of a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. I fell asleep with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time, a fragile peace, perhaps built on still unstable foundations, but peace all the same. I couldn't have imagined that it would be the last peaceful night I would have for a very, very long time. That destiny, still not satisfied with the trials it had imposed on us, was preparing its cruelest, most heartless blow, a blow that would not only destroy the fragile stability we had achieved, but also irrevocably take the man who had been my safe harbor for over 20 years. That night in November of 1995 started like so many others. Felipe called to say he would be a little late at the office. An important client from the border was having serious problems with his tax returns and needed urgent help. "Don't wait up for me," he said, his voice tired over the phone. "It might take a while." I had dinner with Mike, we watched a show on TV, and we talked about the plans for his upcoming 18th birthday. Around 10 o'clock, he took his nightly medication and went to bed. I stayed up a little longer in the living room, knitting a sweater that would be Felipe's Christmas gift, trying not to look at the clock every 5 minutes. 11, midnight, 1 in the morning. Exhaustion finally overtook me. I left a note on the kitchen table. "There's food in the oven. I love you," and went to sleep, imagining that I would find Felipe next to me when I woke up, just like so many other times he had come home late at night. The phone rang at 4:27 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at the digital clock on the nightstand, those red numbers glowing in the darkness of the room. 4:27, the moment my life changed forever. It was Frank, Felipe's partner, calling from Laredo. His voice was trembling so much that I could barely understand the first few sentences. Something about an accident, a fight at a bar, the police trying to make contact. "Calm down, Frank," I said, sitting up in bed, my heart already racing with a terrible premonition. "What are you talking about? What accident? Is Felipe... He's dead." The words hit me like a physical punch, stealing my breath, making the room spin around me. It couldn't be true. Felipe was in Dallas, working at the firm. Frank must have been confused, drunk maybe, or it was some kind of sick joke. "That doesn't make any sense," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "Felipe is here in Dallas. He stayed late at the office last night." There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. Then Frank's voice, now choked with sobs, said, "He was here, Helen. He came yesterday afternoon to handle the situation with Al Mendoza, that winery client. He said he was going to head back to Dallas in the morning." My mind refused to process the information. Felipe hadn't mentioned any trip to Laredo. Why would he hide it from me unless... "What happened, Frank?" I asked, a coldness running down my spine. "Tell me exactly what happened." Slowly, through painful pauses and confused explanations, the story emerged. Felipe had gone to Laredo that day without telling me to personally resolve the client's situation. Once his work was done, he went to a bar, a simple but respectable establishment in the central part of town, to meet up with some friends before spending the night at our old house, which we still maintained. The bar was dangerously close to the border, a territory where the laws of the two countries blurred, where smuggling was rampant, and where criminal groups operated with relative freedom. That night, one of those groups, the Border Crew, a gang known for smuggling liquor and cigarettes, was at the bar. There were about 8 men already drunk, causing a commotion and harassing the other patrons. Felipe, always diplomatic, tried to defuse the situation when one of the men started bothering the waitress. "Leave the girl alone," he reportedly said, stepping between the thug and the young woman. "She's just doing her job." Simple, civilized words, words that cost him his life. The man didn't like the intervention. He pulled out a knife, one of those big hunting knives, and without warning he stabbed Felipe in the abdomen. A single, deep, precise stab. The attacker's friends immediately dragged him out, across the border to the U.S. side, where they would be safe from Mexican law enforcement. Felipe was rushed to the small city hospital, but the bleeding was too extensive. He died on the operating table, with no chance to say goodbye, no chance to fight. At 3:48 in the morning, his death was officially pronounced. When I hung up the phone, I stayed motionless in bed, unable to cry, to scream, to do anything. A strange numbness took hold of my body, as if I were watching everything from a great distance, as if it were someone else receiving the news that their husband of 20 years had been murdered in a bar fight. I don't know how long I was like that, paralyzed. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. The sky was starting to lighten when I finally managed to move. My first conscious thought was about Mike. How could I tell our son, already so fragile from his illness, that his father had been brutally murdered? How could I protect him from a blow that would surely threaten all the progress he had made in the past few months? I decided to wait until he woke up on his own. There was no rush. Nothing would change the fact that Felipe was dead, and I needed those few hours to minimally process what had happened, to find the strength to be the pillar my son would need. I took a hot bath, letting the tears finally come, mixing with the running water. I dressed mechanically, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table and waited. Mike appeared around 8, his hair messy from sleep, his eyes still a little cloudy from the night before his medication. He smiled when he saw me, a sleepy, innocent smile. "Morning, Mom. Where's Dad?" The question was so normal, so routine, that for one insane second, I thought about lying, about saying that Felipe had left early and would be back soon. To postpone for a few hours the inevitable pain that was coming. But I looked into my son's eyes, Felipe's same honey-colored eyes, and I knew I couldn't do that. "Son," I began, my voice trembling despite all my efforts to keep it steady. "Something terrible happened. Your father went to Laredo yesterday to solve a client problem, and there he—" The words refused to come out. How do you say that the man he admired most in the world, his hero, his safe harbor, had been stabbed to death in a border bar fight? How do you put something so brutal, so senseless, into words? "He died, didn't he?" Mike asked, his voice strangely calm. "The man in the hat told me this would happen." A shiver ran down my spine. The man in the hat, Mike's most persistent hallucination, which we thought was under control with the medication. Had he come back, or was it just a macabre coincidence? "Yes, son," I confirmed, reaching for his hands across the table. "There was a fight at a bar. He tried to defend a girl who was being harassed, and a man attacked him with a knife. He didn't survive." I was expecting tears, screams, and denial, any of the normal reactions to grief. Instead, I saw something that scared me much more, a detachment, a disconnection, as if a curtain had descended over Mike's eyes, separating him from reality. "He told me," my son repeated, his gaze fixed on a point past my shoulder. "The man in the hat said Dad was going to leave us, that it would just be the two of us, that it was better that way." "Mike," I said, squeezing his hands, trying to bring him back. "That's not real. Your father didn't leave us by choice. It was a terrible accident, a tragedy. No one could have foreseen it." But he was no longer listening to me. He got up abruptly, went to the window, and started mumbling to himself or to someone only he could see. The crisis we had feared so much was beginning, catalyzed by the shock of the loss. I immediately called Dr. Roberts, explaining the situation in hurried words, broken by fear. He understood the gravity of the moment and promised to come to our apartment as quickly as possible. In the meantime, he instructed, "Give him an extra dose of his emergency medication. Keep him calm. Don't confront him. Don't deny what he's seeing or hearing. Just be present." The next few hours were a blur of phone calls, impossible decisions, and practical arrangements. Felipe's body needed to be transported from Laredo to Dallas. The funeral needed to be organized. The family needed to be informed. And above all, Mike needed to be stabilized. Dr. Roberts arrived around 10 in the morning, accompanied by a psychiatric nurse. They found Mike in the middle of a full-blown psychotic episode, having an animated conversation with his father, who in his mind was sitting on the living room sofa, telling him how his death had just been a ruse to fool the invisible persecutors who populated his delusions. "He's in full dissociation," the doctor explained after assessing my son. "His mind is protecting itself from the unbearable pain, creating an alternative reality where his father is still alive." "What do we do?" I asked, exhausted and devastated, fearing the answer I already anticipated. He needs immediate hospitalization. It's not safe to leave him at home in this state. He could harm himself or others. And so, on the same day I lost my husband, I had to hospitalize my son again. This time, not at St. Luke's Hospital, but at a more modern private clinic with more advanced treatments, paid for with the life insurance policy that Felipe, always a planner, had taken out years before. The days that followed were the darkest of my existence. Felipe's wake passed in a state of stupor, as if I were watching everything from outside my own body. People I barely knew shaking my hand, offering condolences, and murmuring words of comfort that didn't register in my mind. The absence of Mike, sedated in a psychiatric clinic, unaware of his father's final farewell, was an additional pain, as if my family had been torn from me in layers, one loss on top of another. The burial took place in Dallas, not Laredo. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving Felipe in the city that had taken him from me. Besides, our life was in Dallas now. As painful as it was to admit, we had no plans to return to the border. Frank, Felipe's partner, was extraordinary during that period. He handled all the paperwork and legal matters related to the business. He made sure I had immediate access to Felipe's share of Frontier accounting and that the insurance policy was activated without complications, so that nothing material would add to the crushing weight of grief I was already carrying. A week after the funeral, when the house was finally empty of well-meaning relatives and worried friends, I sat alone on the porch of our apartment, watching the sunset over Dallas. It was a spectacular sunset, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink that Felipe would have loved to photograph. The beauty of the moment contrasted cruelly with the emptiness inside me. It was there, on that porch, that I finally allowed the full reality of my situation to hit me. I was alone. My husband, my life partner, had been brutally murdered. My only son was hospitalized with a severe psychotic episode, his condition potentially and permanently worsened by the trauma. Our life, so carefully rebuilt in Dallas, had been shattered in a matter of hours. I cried until I had no more tears, until my body ached physically from the effort of sobbing. I cried for Felipe, for the life we built together, for the dreams we would never realize. I cried for Mike, for the uncertain future that awaited him, for the constant battle against the demons in his mind. I cried for myself, for the woman I was and would never be again. When the sun finally disappeared on the horizon, I got up, wiped my face, and made a decision. I would not allow myself to fall apart. Not now. Not when my son needed me more than ever. Felipe was gone, but Mike was still here, fighting, and I would fight by his side until my last breath. The following months were an arduous journey of readjustment. Mike remained hospitalized for 6 weeks, receiving intensive treatment with new medications, daily therapies, and innovative approaches to control his delusions, which now included frequent conversations with his deceased father. I visited him every day, spending hours by his side, even when he barely noticed my presence, lost in his inner world. I would read him books he loved as a child, news from the newspaper, and letters from old school friends. I talked about Felipe, about the memories we shared, trying to gradually help him accept the reality of the loss. Meanwhile, I dealt with practical matters I never imagined I would face alone. What should I do with Frontier accounting? I had no training in the field. I couldn't take over Felipe's part of the business operationally. Frank offered to buy my share, guaranteeing a fair price and monthly payments that would give me financial stability for a few years. And the house in Laredo? Keeping it would mean a painful connection to the place where Felipe was murdered. Selling it would mean cutting the last physical ties to the city where we built our family and where we lived so many happy moments. Decisions, decisions, decisions. All weighing exclusively on my shoulders with no Felipe to discuss, ponder, or advise with, without even a son who was lucid enough to offer an opinion. It was during this period that I discovered an inner strength I didn't know I had. I learned to trust my own judgment, to make difficult decisions, and to live with their consequences. I sold the house on the border and accepted Frank's offer for Felipe's share in the firm. I reorganized our finances to ensure that no matter what, Mike would always have the resources for his treatment. In January of 1996, 2 months after Felipe's death, Mike was finally discharged from the clinic. He was more stable. The delusions were controlled by the new medication, and the reality of his father's death was gradually accepted, at least on a conscious level. But it was a different young man who came home. Quieter, more withdrawn, with a distant look that rarely brightened. The doctors explained that this was to be expected, a combination of the effects of the stronger medication, the natural process of grief, and the evolution of schizophrenia itself. "He may never be exactly as he was before," Dr. Roberts warned during one of our appointments. "The important thing now is stability, security, and routine." And that's what I tried to provide. I turned our apartment into a sanctuary of calm and predictability. Regular times for meals, medication, and therapy. A calm environment without excessive stimuli that could trigger a crisis. A constant presence, attentive but not suffocating. Mike had just turned 18, legally an adult, but emotionally more vulnerable than a child. The dream of college was temporarily put on hold. Instead, he started going to a psychosocial rehabilitation center 3 times a week, where he participated in therapeutic workshops, support groups, and recreational activities with other young people in similar situations. The routine worked for a while. There were even moments of hope, sparks of the old Mike emerging occasionally, a perceptive comment about a book he was reading, an unexpected joke during dinner, a renewed interest in drawing, an activity he had always loved as a child. But the stability was fragile, built on shaky foundations. All it took was a trigger, a photo of Felipe he found unexpectedly, a song on the radio that reminded him of his father, the casual mention of Laredo in some conversation. For the anxiety to rise, for his gaze to become distant again, for his lips to start moving in silent conversations with invisible interlocutors. At first, these relapses were brief and controllable with emergency medication, with breathing techniques he had learned in therapy, and with my reassuring presence by his side. But little by little, they became more frequent, more intense, and more difficult to reverse. In March, there was a particularly terrifying incident. I woke up in the middle of the night to find Mike standing next to my bed with a pocket knife in his hand, his glassy eyes fixed on me. "He said I need to check," he murmured, his voice distant and mechanical, "to check if you're real or an imposter." I managed to calm him down, get him to hand over the knife, lead him back to his room, and administer the emergency medication. But something inside me broke that night. The cruel reality of our situation became impossible to ignore. My son, in his moments of crisis, posed a real danger to himself and potentially to me. The next morning, I called Dr. Roberts. The conversation was long and painful, filled with tears on my part and thoughtful silences on his. In the end, the conclusion was inevitable. Mike needed a level of supervision and care that I alone could no longer provide. "There are options," the doctor assured me, his voice gentle but firm. "We're not talking about an old-fashioned asylum, Helen. There are modern, humane therapeutic residences where he would have 24-hour monitoring, structured activities, and interaction with other patients, and you could visit regularly." "Like a nursing home?" I replied bitterly, guilt already gnawing at my heart. "I'm abandoning my son." "Absolutely not," he insisted. "You are doing what is best for him, ensuring he receives the care he needs. It's an act of love, not abandonment." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But in the weeks that followed, as I visited institutions, spoke with professionals, and filled out forms, the feeling that I was betraying Mike and failing as a mother never left me. How could I explain to an 18-year-old, already so fragile from the loss of his father, that he could no longer live with his mother? How could I make him understand that it wasn't rejection or abandonment, but the only way to ensure his safety and well-being? The conversation I had dreaded finally happened in April, on a sunny afternoon. Mike was having a good day, lucid and present, and he even helped me prepare lunch. I sat with him on the porch, his hands in mine, and explained as lovingly as possible what was about to happen. To my surprise, there was no resistance, no accusations, just a nod of understanding, a resigned sigh, and then a question that broke my heart. "Is it because of that night with the pocket knife? You're scared of me, aren't you?" "I'm not scared of you, son," I replied, tears already blurring my vision. "I'm scared for your safety. When the voices get too loud, you could hurt yourself badly. I wouldn't forgive myself if something happened to you while you were in my care." He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "The man in the hat says it's better this way, that I need to be away from you, that I'm a danger." Those words hit me like a stab. The disease was stealing not only my son's mind, but also his right to be loved unconditionally, to feel worthy of care, closeness, and normalcy. "The man in the hat is wrong," I said firmly, holding his face in my hands and making him look into my eyes. "You are not a danger. You are my son, my heart outside my body. That will never change, and I'm not sending you away. I'll be with you every day, visiting you and participating in your treatment. We'll just be sleeping in different places." I don't know if he really believed me. How could he? But he accepted with a resignation that suggested that maybe, on some level, he understood the necessity of the change. In May of 1996, 6 months after Felipe's death, Mike moved to New Horizon Therapeutic Residence, a relatively new institution on the outskirts of Dallas. It was a pleasant place, at least from the outside. A large, airy house with well-kept gardens, individual rooms for residents, cozy common areas, and a team of professionals who seemed genuinely committed to the well-being of the patients. On the day of the move, I helped him set up his room, put our photos on the walls, arranged his favorite books on the small bookshelf, and made his bed with the sheets from home, so he would have something familiar in the new environment. When it was time to say goodbye, he hugged me with a surprising intensity. "It's all going to be okay, Mom," he whispered, strangely reversing our roles, as if he were the one who needed to comfort me. "I understand why it has to be this way." Driving back to the empty apartment that night, I let the tears run freely. In less than a year, I had lost my husband to violence, and now, in a way, I had also lost my son to the cruel disease that was devouring his mind. The house that was supposed to shelter our family was reduced to a silent space inhabited only by me, surrounded by photos and memories of a life that seemed to belong to someone else, in another time. In the months that followed, I established a new routine. I visited Mike every day, participated in the family meetings offered by the institution, and talked regularly with his doctors and therapists. On good days, I would take him on short outings, a walk in the nearby park, coffee at a bakery, and occasionally even lunch at the apartment on weekends. He seemed to be adapting reasonably well. The adjusted medication, the structured routine, and the consistency of professional follow-up all contributed to a stability we could no longer achieve at home. There were episodes, of course, days when I would find him more confused and distant, talking to his deceased father, or to the persistent man in the hat. But they were managed quickly by the team, without escalating into severe crises like the ones I had witnessed at home. "He's making progress," the doctors assured me, slowly but progressing. And I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. To fill the empty days and the deafening silence of the apartment, I went back to work. Not with the cakes that brought me joy in Laredo. I had lost my taste for creating sweet things when life had become so bitter. Instead, I took a job as a receptionist at a medical clinic near home. The work was simple, but it filled the hours, provided some human interaction, and most importantly, it was just 15 minutes from the therapeutic residence, allowing me to visit Mike during my lunch break or immediately after my shift. I felt like a plant that had its roots ripped out and was now desperately trying to sprout new growth in arid soil. Every small routine, every new acquaintance, every established habit was an attempt to create some kind of structure and meaning in a world that had lost its fundamental coordinates. The first anniversary of Felipe's death arrived like a storm in a sky that was just starting to clear. November of 1996, 1 year since I lost my life partner, my safe harbor. The pain, which had become a constant but manageable hum in the back of my mind, returned with all its force that day. I spent the morning at the cemetery, sitting next to his simple but elegant grave, talking in a low voice to the man who still visited my dreams every night. I told him about Mike, about the therapeutic residence, about my new job, about the crushing loneliness I felt even when surrounded by people, and about the constant fear of the future. "How am I going to go on without you, Felipe?" I murmured, running my fingers over the letters carved into the tombstone. "How am I going to take care of our son all by myself?" I didn't expect an answer, of course, but in that sacred silence of the cemetery, under the gray sky of a melancholic November, I felt something calm down inside me. Not a resignation, not a complete acceptance. I would never fully accept what had happened, the senseless brutality that took Felipe from us, but maybe a recognition that despite everything, I was surviving. One day after another, one breath after another, I was still here. And as long as I was here, Mike would have someone fighting for him, believing in him, and loving him unconditionally. I visited him that afternoon, as I did every day. To my surprise, he seemed especially lucid, as if he also felt the weight of the date. "A year ago today, isn't it?" he asked when we sat in the residence's garden. "That Dad passed away." I nodded, unable to trust my voice at that moment. "I miss him," Mike continued, his eyes fixed on the flowers swaying gently in the breeze. "Not the Dad I see sometimes in my episodes, but the real Dad. The one who played ball with me in the backyard, who taught me math, who never gave up on me, even when I started getting sick." The tears I had held back at the cemetery finally came, silently running down my cheeks. It was the first time in months that Mike had spoken so clearly about Felipe, distinguishing between the real father and the figure who appeared in his delusions. "I think he would be so proud of you," I finally managed to say, "of how you're handling all this, of how you're trying so hard with your treatment." A sad smile touched my son's lips. "Maybe. Or maybe he'd be sad to see what I became, mentally ill, institutionalized, with no future, no—" "Don't talk like that," I interrupted, grabbing his hands. "You have a future, Mike, a different one than we imagined before, maybe, but a future. And you have me. You'll always have me." He squeezed my hands back, a gesture so simple, but so meaningful at that moment. For a brief but precious instant, we were just a mother and son sharing a pain and supporting each other. Not a woman visiting a psychiatric patient. Not a young man trying to distinguish between reality and hallucination. Just us, family. What was left of the family we once were? The months turned into years. 1997 gave way to 1998, then to 1999. Mike remained at the therapeutic residence, with ups and downs in his treatment. There were periods of admirable stability when he would actively participate in workshops, develop relationships with other residents, and even show interest in resuming some studies. And there were crises, some so severe that they required temporary hospitalization in more intensive clinics. I continued my routine, my job at the medical clinic, which eventually turned into a more stable administrative position, my daily visits to Mike, and the upkeep of the small apartment that I never truly came to feel was home, an existence that was constant but empty, defined more by absences than by presences. The turn of the millennium brought innovations in the treatment of schizophrenia, more effective medications with fewer side effects, innovative therapeutic approaches, and a greater understanding of the disease, its mechanisms, and how to manage it in a more humane and efficient way. Mike, now 22, benefited from these innovations. Gradually, with the new medication, his crises became less frequent and less intense. The man in the hat, who had haunted him for years, began to appear less often until he became an almost ghostly presence, a distant echo rather than a dominant voice. In 2001, something unexpected happened. The therapeutic residents started a partial reintegration program. More stable patients could spend a few days a week outside the institution in controlled family environments as part of the process of readapting to community life. Mike was one of the first to be selected. "He's ready," his psychiatrist, Dr. Williams, who had been following his case for years, stated. "He still needs supervision. He'll still have bad days. He still needs a structured environment, but he can benefit from more time at home, more autonomy, and a more consistent connection with the outside world." I can't describe the mix of emotions I felt. Joy, hope, but also a paralyzing fear. What if he had a severe crisis while he was in my care? What if the triggers at home were too strong? What if I couldn't protect him, just like I couldn't protect him that terrible night with the pocket knife years ago? But above all was the deep desire to have my son back, even if it was only partially, even if it was under controlled conditions, to make him breakfast, to watch TV together at night, to create new memories that weren't limited by the institutional walls of the residence. And so, in September of 2001, Mike began spending weekends at home. From Friday night to Sunday afternoon, a nurse from the residence would bring him on Friday and pick him up on Sunday, ensuring that the transition was smooth, that his medication was taken correctly, and that any signs of decompensation were identified early. They were precious weekends despite the challenges. Mike still had moments of disconnection, still occasionally talked to invisible interlocutors, and still needed rigid routines and calm environments. But there were also moments of surprising normalcy, like when we would cook together, when we would discuss a book we had both read, or when we would simply sit on the porch watching the city and sharing a comfortable silence. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Mom," he said one of those nights, his voice almost a whisper. "I know it hasn't been easy." "I would never give up on you," I replied, my throat tight with contained emotion. "Never." The arrangement worked well enough that in 2003, it was expanded. Mike now spent 4 days a week at home, returning to the residence only from Monday to Wednesday for intensive therapy and medication adjustments when necessary. It was almost like having him back, almost like rebuilding a version of the family life I thought I had lost forever. It wasn't perfect, of course. There were relapses, days when he would lock himself in his room, refusing to eat or talk, and days when his gaze would become distant again, his voice mechanical. There were significant limitations on what we could do, what places we could go, and what people we could interact with. Schizophrenia was still there, a constant presence in our lives, dictating rules and imposing barriers. But we were together. We were fighting day after day, year after year, and somehow we found little joys and little victories in the midst of the constant battle. In 2005, 10 years after Mike's initial diagnosis and 7 years after Felipe's murder, I allowed myself something I hadn't dared to feel in all that time: hope. Not a naive hope of a miraculous cure or a return to pre-illness normalcy, but a mature, realistic hope for a dignified life with purpose and moments of genuine happiness, despite the limitations imposed by his condition. Mike, now 27, had found an interest that turned into almost a vocation: art. He discovered in painting a form of expression that seemed to bypass the barriers of his fragmented mind. His abstract paintings, intensely colored, often disturbing, but always magnetic, began to attract attention, not just from the residence's therapists, but also from visitors and other professionals. A small exhibition was organized at the city's cultural center. It was called Extraordinary Minds, featuring works by psychiatric patients from various institutions in Dallas. Mike's paintings took up an entire wall, standing out for their surprisingly refined technique, their distinctive color palette, and the almost palpable energy they emanated. I was there on opening night, watching from a distance as my son, dressed in a button-down shirt I had bought especially for the occasion, talked with visitors, explained his creative process, and received compliments with a mix of shyness and pride. At times, it was impossible to distinguish him from any other young, up-and-coming artist. There were no external signs of the disease that was consuming him on the inside. There was nothing to suggest the daily battles he fought just to stay connected to reality. That night, on the way home in a taxi, Mike would return to the residence with the therapeutic companions who supervised the event. I allowed myself to cry. Not tears of sadness or despair like so many I had shed over the years, but tears of a pride so intense that it physically ached in my chest. My son, against all odds, had found a voice, a way to communicate with the world, to transform the chaos in his mind into something tangible, something beautiful, something that touched other people. The disease had not completely defeated him. There were spaces where he could still flourish and still truly be himself. And I, who for so many years saw myself only as a caregiver, a support, a safety net, now allowed myself a new role, that of a proud mother celebrating her son's achievements, no matter how different they were from what I had once dreamed for him. Life would continue to be difficult, of course. There would be more crises, more hospitalizations, and more moments of despair. Schizophrenia is not a condition that simply disappears, even with the best treatment available. And Felipe's absence, that pain that became a part of me, like a scar that never completely fades, would still be felt on every birthday, every Christmas, every significant moment he wasn't there to share. But maybe, just maybe, there was room for more than just survival. Maybe there was a possibility for small joys, for purpose, for meaning, even in the midst of the ruins of what was once our life. And it was with that thought, not exactly hopeful, but at least not completely somber, that I kept going day after day, year after year by my son's side, facing the challenges that a cruel destiny had imposed on us together, finding beauty where we could, creating meaning from the chaos, and refusing to let tragedy have the last word in our story. It was in October of 2008 that my life took another unexpected turn. Mike, now 30 years old, had achieved a stability that allowed us a routine that was almost normal. He spent 5 days a week at home, returning to the therapeutic residence only for consultations and therapeutic activities. His medication was well adjusted, his crises had become rare, and he even sold a few paintings occasionally through a gallery that specialized in art by psychiatric patients. I was 55 years old and still working at the same medical clinic, now as an administrative manager. It was a simple life, without great excitement, but it was stable. Finally, after so many years of storms, it seemed that we had found a safe harbor. That Monday morning, I was getting ready to leave for work when I slipped on the bathroom mat. It was a silly fall, one of those that in normal circumstances would just result in a bruise and a story to tell. But I felt immediately that something was wrong. A searing pain in my right ankle and an almost instant swelling. "Mom, is everything okay in there?" Mike knocked on the door, his voice worried. "I heard a noise." "I slipped, son," I replied, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "I think I hurt my ankle." He helped me out of the bathroom and supported me to the bed. He examined my foot with surprising concentration, his delicate fingers palpating the swelling that was already forming. "We need to go to the hospital," he decided, surprising me with his clarity and initiative. "It might be broken." And it was. "A fracture of the lateral malleolus," the doctor explained, after examining the X-ray. "It wouldn't require surgery, but it would require 6 weeks of immobilization in a cast, followed by physical therapy and absolute rest for the first few days." "Do you live alone, ma'am?" the doctor asked, a young man with deep circles under his eyes, who had just finished a double shift. "No," I replied, looking at Mike, who was sitting quietly in the chair beside me. "I live with my son." The doctor cast a quick glance at Mike, noticing perhaps something in his behavior, the rhythmic bouncing of his leg, the gaze that occasionally drifted to an empty spot in the room, the lips that moved in silent conversations. Doctors always notice those things. "And is there anyone else who can help you in these first few days?" he insisted, his tone implying his doubt about Mike's ability to take care of me. "I have friends," I lied. I didn't really have any. Years of caring for a schizophrenic son had shrunk my social circle to almost nothing. "And I can hire someone if I need to." The doctor nodded, not entirely convinced. "I strongly recommend that you have help in the first few days. At the very least, you won't be able to put any weight on your foot. You'll need help with basic tasks like bathing and preparing meals." We left the hospital with my foot in a cast, a prescription for painkillers, and a brochure with instructions on how to care for the cast. Mike held my arm firmly as I balanced on the ill-fitting crutches, guiding me to the taxi that would take us home. "I'm going to take care of you, Mom," he said as the car drove through the streets of Dallas. It wasn't the promise of an adult son to his elderly mother, but almost like a child determined to show that he was capable of a responsibility too big for his shoulders. "Thank you, son," I replied, my throat tight with a mixture of gratitude and worry. How much could he really do? For how long would his condition allow him to take on the role of caregiver when for so many years he had been the one who needed care? The first few days went by surprisingly well. Mike was attentive, dedicated, and almost meticulous in following the doctor's instructions. He helped me to the bathroom, prepared simple meals, and religiously checked the times for my medications. I called work, explained the situation, and was granted a 3-week medical leave. Dr. Williams, Mike's psychiatrist, made a house call when she found out about the accident, an extraordinary gesture that showed the special bond she had developed with us over the years. "How are you two managing?" she asked after examining my ankle and approving the care we were taking. "Surprisingly well," I confessed. "Mike has been wonderful. I barely recognized my son in these last few days." She smiled, but her eyes revealed a professional concern that did not escape my notice. "That's good, but we need to be vigilant," she said in a low voice, while Mike was in the kitchen preparing tea for us. "This sudden change in roles, from patient to caregiver, can be stressful for him, even if he doesn't show it now. And stress is one of the main triggers for relapses in cases of schizophrenia." "What do you suggest?" I asked, feeling the familiar tightening in my chest that accompanied any conversation about potential crises. "I'm going to increase our sessions to twice a week, right here at home to make it easier. And I strongly suggest you consider outside help, a nurse for a few hours a day maybe, not only to help you, but to relieve the pressure on Mike." I promised to think about it, even though I knew our finances were tight. The medical insurance would cover part of the physical therapy, but a private nurse would be a luxury we could hardly afford. The second week with the cast brought the first changes in Mike's behavior, subtle at first, a forgetfulness here, an irritability there. Nothing alarming, just signs of fatigue, I thought. Anyone would be exhausted taking care of someone 24 hours a day. It was on Thursday of that week that I noticed something more worrying. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling thirsty, and called for Mike to help me get some water. There was no answer. I shuffled to the bedroom door, leaning on my crutches, and saw him sitting in the dark living room, having an animated conversation with someone who wasn't there. "But you don't understand," he was saying, gesturing to the empty sofa. "She depends on me now. I can't just—" He stopped abruptly when he noticed my presence. He turned around with a sharp movement, his eyes wide and reflecting the little light coming from the street. "Mom," he said, his voice strangely normal, as if he hadn't just been caught talking to the air. "Do you need something?" "Just a little water," I replied, pretending not to have seen or heard anything. Years of living with the disease had taught me when to confront and when to pretend. "I'm sorry to wake you." He got up, solicitous, and went to the kitchen to get the water. I watched his movements, looking for other signs of decompensation. His hands were trembling, his steps were irregular, and his posture was too tense. He seemed normal, but I knew that appearances could be deceiving when it came to schizophrenia. The calm exterior often hides an internal storm. In the following days, the episodes became more frequent and more difficult to ignore. Mike would spend long periods talking to himself in the bathroom with the faucet running to disguise the sound. He would forget simple tasks like giving me my medication or preparing meals. One night, I found him in the kitchen at 3 a.m, all the cabinets open and dishes scattered on the floor. "I'm looking for the cameras," he explained when I asked what he was doing. "They're watching us, Mom. They want to know if I'm taking good care of you." I called Dr. Williams the next morning. She adjusted Mike's medication, increased the frequency of her sessions even more, and reiterated the need for outside help. "It's no longer a suggestion, Helen," she said with her characteristic gentle firmness. "It's a medical necessity. Mike is decompensating under the pressure. We need to relieve that before he goes into a full-blown crisis." I finally gave in. I used a part of the savings I had set aside for emergencies. Ironically, a fund I had always thought would be used for one of Mike's crises, not to pay someone to take care of me, and hired a certified nursing assistant to come for 4 hours a day. Sylvia was a robust, middle-aged woman with calloused hands and an easy smile. She had experience with psychiatric patients, which made her doubly valuable in our situation. Not only did she take care of me, bathing, dressing changes, small exercises to prevent muscle atrophy, but she also knew how to deal with Mike on his bad days. "Is everything okay, sweetie?" she would say when she caught him talking to his hallucinations. "Want to tell me what's bothering you today?" And surprisingly, he would often tell her, as if Sylvia's presence, someone from outside, not burdened by the emotional weight of being his mother, created a safe space for him to admit his fears and his confusion. "The man in the hat came back," he confessed one afternoon while Sylvia was changing my dressing. "He says I'm not taking good care of my mom, that she's going to die because of me, like my dad died." My heart ached when I heard that. After all these years, Mike still carried the guilt for Felipe's death. He still believed, on some level, that he could have prevented the tragedy. Sylvia didn't miss a beat. "And do you believe him?" she asked casually, as if she were discussing the weather. "Sometimes," he admitted finally, "when I'm really tired." "Well, I think the man in the hat doesn't know what he's talking about," Sylvia replied, finishing the bandage with a gentle pat on my leg. "I've never seen a son take such good care of his mother as you do, and I've worked in a lot of homes." I saw something change in Mike's face, a relaxation, a decrease in the tension that had been building up in the last few days. Just a few simple, non-judgmental words from someone he didn't need to protect emotionally. It was in that moment that I realized our mother-son dynamic, as loving as it was also part of the problem. Mike felt responsible not only for my physical care, but for my emotional well-being. He was trying to hide his struggles, his voices, and his fears so he wouldn't worry me, which only increased his internal pressure. Sylvia's presence created an escape valve, a third point in our closed system that allowed for the release of accumulated tension. In the following weeks, with her help for 4 hours a day and frequent visits from Dr. Williams, we managed to establish a fragile but functional balance. My ankle gradually improved. After 6 weeks, the cast was removed, revealing pale, dry skin and a limb that was noticeably thinner from inactivity. I started physical therapy 3 times a week, using a special transport for people with reduced mobility that the city's social services provided. With every small step of progress, the first step without crutches, the first time I could bathe myself, the day I went back to work, initially part-time, Mike also seemed to get a little better, as if my physical recovery was somehow linked to his mental stability. We continued with Sylvia's help, even after my physical recovery was well underway. 2 hours a day, 3 times a week, just enough to give Mike some time to himself, a break from the constant responsibility he felt for me. It was during one of those afternoons, almost 4 months after my fall, that something extraordinary happened. I came home early from physical therapy. The therapist had had an emergency and ended the session halfway through. I opened the door silently, not wanting to interrupt in case Mike was in the middle of one of his painting sessions, which required absolute concentration. The living room was empty, but I heard voices coming from the kitchen. I approached slowly, leaning lightly on the cane that had now replaced my crutches, and heard, "And then," she said, "my painting was visceral and cathartic." Mike was talking, his voice animated in a way I rarely heard. I'm not sure I understood exactly what it means, but by the way she said it, it was a compliment. Of course it was a compliment, Sylvia's voice replied, followed by the sound of dishes being handled. That blue painting you showed me gives you goosebumps. You can really feel the emotion jumping off the canvas. I stopped in the doorway, watching the scene unnoticed. Mike and Sylvia were side by side at the kitchen counter, preparing some kind of dough. Flour partially covered his face, and Sylvia had a dish towel thrown over her shoulder. They seemed so normal, like two friends cooking together, laughing and talking about art and life. "Do you think I could have an exhibition all my own one day?" Mike asked, his voice suddenly shy and vulnerable. "Not just those art shows for patients, but a real one in a normal gallery?" "And why couldn't you?" Sylvia replied, giving him a light nudge. "You have talent to spare, and look, my nephew works at a small gallery in the Heights neighborhood. I can talk to him, see if he'll come take a look at your paintings." Mike's face lit up with a hope so pure, so genuine, that I felt tears in my eyes. I silently backed away, deciding to circle back around and come in making more noise, announcing my arrival. That moment was too precious to be interrupted, that simple human connection that my son so rarely managed to establish with people outside his medical and therapeutic circle. In the months that followed, Sylvia became more than a caregiver. She became a friend, almost a part of the family. Her nephew Leonardo did come to see Mike's paintings and was impressed enough to organize a small exhibition at the gallery where he worked. Contemporary art from the Southwest was what he called the works, without any mention of Mike's condition. Just art, judged on its own merit. The opening was in July of 2009, on a cool summer night in Dallas, a small, intimate event with cheap wine and simple appetizers. But for us, it was like the most spectacular gala night in the world. Mike, nervous but determined, wore the blue shirt that had been Felipe's, carefully kept all these years. I wore a new dress, the first one I had bought in years, and I even treated myself to a trip to the hair salon. As I walked into the gallery and saw Mike's paintings hanging on the white walls, lit by spotlights, labeled with his full name and titles he had chosen himself, something permanently changed in our dynamic. We were no longer just the overprotective mother and the sick son. We were Helen and Michael Lopez, a proud woman and a rising artist. 3 paintings were sold that night, one of them to an art professor from the University of Texas at Dallas, who had no idea that the artist whose work he admired lived with schizophrenia. "There's a dreamlike quality to his work," he told Mike, who was listening intently, his hands trembling slightly with the mix of emotion and nervousness. "A certain depersonalization that reminds me of Magritte, but with a more intense, almost feverish palette. It's fascinating." I watched my son grow 2 inches with that comment, his chest expanding with a pride that had nothing to do with delusions of grandeur and everything to do with the genuine validation of his talent. On the way home in the taxi, Mike would return to the residence with the therapeutic companions who supervised the event. He was silent for several minutes, looking out the window at the city lights reflecting on his thoughtful face. "You know, Mom," he said finally, his voice low but firm, "I think Dad would have enjoyed tonight." I swallowed the lump in my throat before answering. "I'm sure he would have, son. Absolutely sure." It was a turning point in our lives. The fall that initially seemed like a minor catastrophe, adding to all the major tragedies we had already faced, ended up being a blessing in disguise, a detour on the road that led us to landscapes we never would have discovered otherwise. My son found not only a form of expression through art, but also a purpose and an identity beyond his illness. I found the courage to loosen the reins a little, to trust that the world could sometimes be gentle with him, and that people like Sylvia and Leonardo existed, and could see beyond medical labels. Schizophrenia didn't disappear, of course. There were still bad days, occasional crises, and medication adjustments. The man in the hat still appeared in moments of great stress, but now we shared the burden. Not just between the two of us, but with a small network of support that grew organically. Sylvia, Leonardo, other artists from the gallery, and a group for expressive therapy that Mike started attending. Today, sitting in this rocking chair, looking at the walls of my living room, which are decorated with my son's paintings, some he insisted I keep, others I bought at his exhibitions, proud as any mother would be, I think about how life takes unpredictable turns. That fall in the bathroom, which seemed like a minor tragedy on top of all the major tragedies we had already faced, ended up being a disguised blessing, a detour that led us to landscapes we never would have discovered otherwise. Mike is 47 years old now. He still lives with schizophrenia, still has his limitations, and still needs some supervision and support. But he is also a recognized artist in specialized circles. He gives occasional talks on art and mental health. He has a small circle of friends and a life I never imagined was possible in those dark days of initial diagnosis, hospitalizations, and violent crises. And I am here, at 72, sharing this story with you, maybe to give hope to other parents who are facing the diagnosis of a beloved child. Maybe to show that the stories of families affected by severe mental illness don't always end in tragedy. Or maybe just because after so many years of keeping this story inside me, I feel it's time to let it out, to transform it into something that can somehow help others. If you've made it this far, my dear, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know it wasn't an easy story to hear, but I hope you found something useful in it, something that resonates with your own journey, whatever it may be. Before I say goodbye, I'd like to ask for a small favor. If this story touched your heart in any way, please give it a like. Subscribe to the Voices of May channel so you don't miss our next life stories. And tell me in the comments what part of the country you're watching me from. This old lady sends you a tight hug, full of love. And remember, no matter how dark the night, the sun always rises again.